Hello and welcome to Weird Heat. I'm Brian Altano. This is Max Scoville, and today we're talking about creative blocks.
You mean like Lego?
Yeah.
Like Minecraft blocks?
Those are fun. I guess it's more like stepping on a Minecraft block. Creative blocks are like writing blocks or painting blocks or just drawing, anything that is stopping you from being creative.
Artistic constipation.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
It's funny because the term writer's block, I feel like it's very, very familiar, and people know that one pretty easily. Mm-hmm. And then you think like, I don't know if someone's like artistically, creatively frustrated or whatever, that's familiar too. But as far as it being like a cohesive, diagnosis of like, here's the thing, writer's block is kind of an all-encompassing one.
Yeah,
but I feel like if you say creative block, it sounds like a puzzle game, like Intelligent Cube or something.
Yeah. So I guess we will call it writer's block. But if you're listening, just understand that everything under that umbrella is creative, and that it's effectively the opposite of being prolific. I think you can be prolific and still fight writer's blocks and creative blocks, but I don't know if that's as sort of publicized. Because usually when you go like, oh, this guy is prolific, he put out like hundreds of albums, right? Like David Bowie or something. Mm-hmm. He put out albums when he was dead. You don't really think about that guy having writer's block, although it's obviously something he dealt with, and it's something we all deal with, and it's okay. It happens to everybody.
Should we talk about what the reason that we're talking about this week?
Sure.
We didn't have an idea for a show, which is sort of ironic because the whole reason we started doing this show was as a motivation to be more creative.
Yeah.
And so to have a show where we talk about literally anything, and we're like, what should we talk about? We're like, I don't know. That's certainly a type of creative block.
Yeah, and I think to hone in on that more specifically, it's been something you have been dealing with a lot this year. It's something I've been dealing with in a different way this year. It's something that I think plagues every artist. It's something we get asked a lot about by our community because they're, we're lucky to say, a small but very creative bunch of people that make shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've been, it's funny, we started the show being like, this is going to be sort of this is an excuse, this is a justification to just stay motivated and keep busy and keep working, and you've been really good at putting out a song every 2 weeks, mm-hmm. sometimes more often, and it's been fantastic, and I was like, yeah, and I'll draw something, and then I haven't been doing that at all, and it's weird because there's like, I've been sort of creative, I mean, there's a certain degree of I feel like it's almost more like getting the show put together and getting the show edited and put up is like there's enough time spent sort of fine-tuning and making something that there's a sort of almost a creative feeling to go with that. And there's the same thing that, I have at work where I'll, make a YouTube thumbnail or something. And I would say it manages to use kind of creative skills without actually feeling like it has any creative output or weight to it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what we touched on in our traveling episode, where it's kind of like going on a work trip scratches that itch for you of traveling, but it's not necessarily like going on a vacation. And in the same way where you're like making something that's part of something that you're supposed to be making, like a job or something like that, can be creative, but it might not necessarily be the thing that you're looking for as actually like an artistic creative person.
I mean, I would put creativity and like how you make time for it in the same category as I would like working out or eating healthy. There has to be a certain routine to it. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, you see people do like National Novel Writing Month or whatever, or I forget what that actually is.
NaNoWriMo,
yeah.
NaNoWriMo.
Yeah, that one. But the idea is that write an entire novel in November or whatever. And then there's Inktober or whatever. People do like a single ink drawing every day. And I never jump on that. And I never, it has to be like, it's the same thing with doing like a, like Whole30 diet or being like, oh, I go to the gym 3 times a week. The second you don't do it, you break it, you fuck up your own schedule. And like, I know that like, I think that like Stephen King has that book on writing, which I keep meaning to check out because it's supposed to be sort of like an indispensable guide to writing. And I feel like a lot of those kind of, that mentality can apply to really any kind of creative field. Mm-hmm. But I, haven't gotten around to that. But I know one thing is like, he suggests having like an office or like a place where you can go and just close the door, and that's like your work area, which is a thing I've been dealing with at home. I was starting to set up a studio that I was going to be like using as a creative place, and then a friend was in need of a place to crash, so we've got a new roommate, and I have like a large fold-out table in the middle of my living room that I'm using to do hobby stuff, and like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, I feel like a lot of the sort of tinkery, crafty things I've been doing lately don't really constitute art, and they don't really feel like a proper creative output. But
well, it's weird because like you in the time that your like sort of drawing slider dipped down, your model making slider went up.
Yeah,
and I think for a lot of people that's not necessarily a creative thing; it's more mechanical.
It's crafting versus art, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is the difference?
Well, the thing is, you take your model kits, and a lot of times, and then you add paint to them, and you scuff them up, and you score them and stuff like that. And I think that's where some creative aspects come into it. But at the end of the day, you are sort of like, you know, it's in the same way that if you fixed up a car in a yard, like that would be different than drawing.
It
right?
lives in that same category as like a coloring book or a Lego set, where it's like, or even just it's tinkering. You know, like it's kind of there is some sort of a structure there. It's not just like completely making something from the ground up. It's not sculpting. It's still creative, but
so let's diagnose this real quick, because I think that like what's interesting is that you're not only like one of my favorite artists in the world, you're also the kind of guy that needs. I think you're one of my favorite artists in the world because I grew up respecting sketchy graffiti culture. And I don't mean sketchy like illegal, although there's a lot of that, but I mean just like quick throwies, right, and stuff like that. And the fact that you have sat down in front of me hundreds of times and pulled out a pen from your pocket or a notepad or a sketchbook or a bar napkin or a coaster, and you've done a drawing on it and then just kind of left it there or pocketed it and take a picture and then walked out. So your barrier to entry to actually creating art is pretty low, considering. I mean, it's not like you're a pointillism watercolor painter that needs a 6x12 canvas to operate, right?
I think I fuck it up the more I try to actually make something.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a sort of chaos that needs to be in place, and I think some of to wax artistic for a second, some of my best work has come out of boredom. I think when I was the most prolific was when I had a completely fucking brainless office job that didn't require much of me. Like I worked in a copy center where there was tons and tons of paper and lots of Sharpies and plenty of Post-its and ballpoint pens and copy machines if I really wanted to get weird. And I would just kind of fuck around. And I would I put out a zine that summer. Like I just was like, for me, stealing company supplies and fucking around, it was just like nonsense in Photoshop with Sharpie and whiteout. And like, I don't know, I feel like I'm busy enough that I don't have that surplus of kind of creative drive, and it's infuriating, and it's I don't know, like a lot of the time when I do start doodling, it's because there's some level of boredom there, and it's hard to manufacture the boredom required to sort of instigate that.
Right.
Like if I'm drawing on a bar napkin, it's because I'm hanging out in some social environment and I'm like, I don't really feel like talking, or it's almost like a nervous tick where I'm like, I'll whip out my sketchbook and somebody will start talking to me, and then suddenly it's like I'm not thinking too hard about either.
Right. Yeah, it's fucked up for me because I was an artist first. I started drawing, painting, sculpting when I was a little kid, building, like being the son of a writer and an architect my mom was an illustrator too. It was the kind of thing where it was just always there. And then I think things transitioned into more digital art, like in the last few years or last 10 years or so. And I started writing or sketching less. And I think the thing that keeps me from drawing right now, and I love drawing and I like to think that I'm pretty good at it sometimes, the thing that keeps me from doing it is that there's like this weird permanence to having a sketchbook full of mistakes and fuck ups, like that a sketchbook is sort of this fucking tome that sits on the shelf next to my Star Wars art books and books that I got from my kid. And
I have literally boxes full of sketchbooks that are all like a third of the way full.
Yeah.
And it's always because you hit a point where I don't know what happens. I think it's when you get a new sketchbook.
Yep.
There's this sort of like feeling of like, oh, it's almost like a blade getting dull. Where like the second you get bored of your own sketchbook, you're like, I don't know about this one anymore.
Well, I have a sketchbook that I think I left at your house, and it was like one day I drew a bird and I hated it, and then I turned the page, and the next day I drew. My brother did a comedy show to help create a charity thing for my mom, and I drew a bunch of illustrations that reminded me of stuff in her life. And the next page I drew something for Weird Heat, and so I have this weird fucked up folder of a thing I don't want to be reminded of, a thing I hated that I drew, some shit that I liked that I drew a long time ago that I could look at and think I want to do better, and then there's 50 pages that are blank. And so to draw, like I saw a Black Friday sale for like an iPad and the iPencil or whatever the fuck, and I'm like, maybe I'll do that because then that's like, it's digital, and when I hate it, I can scrap it that second. I don't have to save it on my shelf. I don't have to look at it. And like, then there's the fact that like to draw, you need like, sometimes you need a desk and you need a place, you know, like sort of like you were saying, like you need your door closed. I'm prolific with music because it is a vacuum by nature. It is this thing where you put headphones on and you're immune to the world around you for all for all the good and bad with that. There's been occasional times where my baby's been in a rocker next to me and I'm just like really in the zone on a song, and I look over and she's just like mouth agape and it looks like she's screaming. I take my headphones off and she's like, ah, and I'm like, oh God, how long is that going for? And that's really tough, right? Because I think it's like, when you realize that like you create all these situations in your head that are effectively excuses of why you can't do something. And I'm dealing with it with working out right now, which is not a creative block, but it's also like my personal trainer doesn't work at my gym anymore, and he texted me saying like I'm not there. So I said, okay, I'm going to make a concerted effort to get in there more often on my own. But in the meantime, I have free weights at home, so I'll use the free weights. So the free weights sit underneath my TV. And to use the free weights, I go, okay, well, my baby can't be in the room because I don't want to drop one on her. So this can only happen when in the mornings and the evenings when she's not asleep or awake. So right off the bat, created rules that have their own confines. Secondly, I'm like, well, if I'm going to work out in front of the TV, the easiest way to do that is to watch a show. So there's got to be a show I really like. So I'm like, okay, I'll watch Narcos. Cool. Love Narcos. Put it on. That Narcos is like 80% Spanish. So you need to watch it. You need to pay attention because it's all subtitles. So I'm like, okay, so Narcos isn't a good show.
So that's a good treadmill show.
Yeah. And so then I look, exactly, but I don't have one of those because I live in an apartment. So I look at the weights on the ground and I'm like, well, I don't have a show that I like, so I can't lift weights. And then I don't fucking work out.
No, it's funny because it's like a reverse of that old, like, if you give a mouse a cookie thing.
Yeah.
But with procrastination, I mean, we talked about that before, but like, I think with needing to get everything right, and it's, again, this is the creative block thing where sometimes you just need to not do anything. Like I had this phase, I've had this might be totally normal for me too, like to just stop making something and like fucking just let it sort of heal almost. But there was a point in school when I was like, I used to draw all the time, and I was like, I will never be able to draw the way I want to draw. I hate it all. I think I've talked about this on the show because it's very relevant to creative stuff. And I just stopped, and I waited what seemed like a very, very long time because I was like 15 or whatever. And then I suddenly started just very slowly drawing again, and it was like something had healed, and it was a little bit different, and I was like able to like I was doodling without giving a shit, and I was just kind of like, oh wait, I sort of like that, and then suddenly I'm working stuff around, and I'm happy with it, and I don't know, it's funny because like I'll make like YouTube thumbnails for work, or I'll do like a goofy Photoshop for Twitter or something, and it never feels like
you'll take the stairs instead of like the elevator and in the losing weight metaphor, like
but I mean it's also, I don't know, you're finding like little places where you are diverting that creative energy, and
because it's not a total on-off switch.
No, it all seeps out somewhere. I don't know. It's weird to think about, and it's.
I will say that like one of the benefits of music production that's different than, and it's why it's like, you're like, oh, you put out a song every 2 weeks, you're crazy prolific. People are always like, how do you do all that with a baby and all that stuff? I think the main thing is two things. One, when you approach music, it is different every single time because I don't get, personally using my setup, one day I can sit down and be like, I'm starting with piano. The next day I can be like, I'm starting with strings. The next day I can go, I'm going to do a drum pattern first. And the way I approach all those things is dramatically different. I approach my sketchbook and my fucking pen the exact same way every single time. It is just like head on, white page, black line, go. And sometimes I can't do that, and sometimes I'm not in the mood for that. So if like you're a musician and you're a guitarist, like Thomas Rakowitz, who played, on Misanthrope, my album, he messaged me the other day saying like, how do you deal with this? Like creative block. And I would implore you that if you're a musician to maybe come at it through a different angle or a different medium, basically say to yourself, like, if I'm a guitarist, I won't start with my guitar because if I'm brain dead and blocked, I'm going to start with drums. I'm going to start with something else, even starting with a bass guitar, starting with something completely different. Like if you're a visual artist and you always start with your sketchbook, don't. Maybe start with markers. Maybe start with paint. Like maybe set down a gouache.
Well,
maybe.
I mean, I think in sort of likening creating stuff to exercise, that's a interesting thing. You got to have some level of resistance for exercise. Like it doesn't, if you're just sort of doing what feels comfortable, you're not really doing much. If you're just kind of doing weird, I don't know, I'm doing like a chicken flapping movement here, but if you're just kind of spinning your wheels, you're not going to do anything. There's got to be, for lack of a better expression, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
And I think if you always sit down, you always do the same exact thing, eventually you get really good at doing that one thing, which is cool. It's good if you're able to do, whatever that thing is, but like maybe challenge yourself. And that's so much of what sort of art school is or art classes is that, where it's like, hey, here's something you probably don't want to do. Here's a part where you have to eat your vegetables. And it's, this is, today we're doing burpees. Today we're doing fucking like figure drawing.
Right.
Today this is alla prima. You paint as much as you can in one sitting and then you're fucking done. That's it,
That's a really important thing you just said too. It's sort of like creating self-imposed scenarios, deadlines, just weird things like that where you can say to yourself like, okay, well, if I always draw like this, today I'm only doing 30-second sketches. Like if you're the watercolor pointillism guy, just do 30-second sketches. If you're the 30-second sketch guy, try the watercolor pointillism. And one of the other reasons I really like music is because I can start something like a bunch of Weird Heat songs were things that I started months before Weird Heat even began, and then was able to revisit because music production is set up in a way that you can sort of pause it, put it in amber, and then bring it back to life. It's sort of like if you were sitting down to make dinner and you chopped up a bunch of like onions and carrots and celery, and then you left it on your counter for a year and a half and it didn't go bad. And you got to walk back into the kitchen and go like, what do I make for dinner tonight?
Dude, if that was the case, my kitchen would be a fucking nightmare. That'd be warped.
So this is where it gets interesting because I think that's a little tougher to do with visual art, but I think it's still totally doable. Like, I hate that fucking bird sketch, but what if I picked up my sketchbook and I use it as an impetus to draw something around it or paint over it in the same way that people like look at a tattoo they got when they were 16 and they hate it. It's a butterfly, and then they turn it into like two skeletons fucking, which is probably a worse tattoo, but still, you get what I'm saying.
I think skeletons should fuck. Everybody should fuck. That sounds great.
But basically, all of us are skeletons fucking.
It's funny though. Like the last thing I drew that I was sort of happy with, and it's been a second, but I drew like a really quick. We have all these paper coasters because I bought a while ago, ages and ages ago. I started painting on coasters that I got at a bar, and I like flipped them over, and I was like, these are incredibly absorbent because they're meant to, soak up beer rings. And so for putting like watercolor and gouache on there has like a really cool effect. So I went on Amazon, I bought like 100 paper coasters, and then I proceeded to not keep doing that. So we just had a shit ton of coasters.
Yep.
We threw a party, and then I, years later, I was like, oh, I have these coasters sitting around, and I, picked one up while we were watching fucking King of the Hill or something, and I started sketching this model that I'm building. Not from reference, but from memory, because I'd been staring at it all this time, like assembling it and sanding it and adding putty and painting it and all this shit. And then I was just like, oh fuck, is that my loophole there? Is that my way to make new original shit, is to start to build a fucking... It's so cart before the horse to be like...
No, I mean, you take your inspiration where you can get it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fucking important.
I mean, it's funny, like there's that... do you ever see the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie?
No.
So Ralph Bakshi is a significant animator. I don't know if he's a great animator, but he did some interesting shit. But he made a Lord of the Rings movie. It was the first Lord of the Rings movie, and the whole thing is that he shot a goddamn live-action movie and then rotoscoped it. Like, he got a bunch of costumes and horses and filmed a bunch of people doing a bunch of Lord of the Rings shit, and then just drew over the entire thing, which seems like a little bit of like a long walk, but every journey starts with a single step, I guess. And I don't know. It's just, I feel like maybe that's a thing I should fuck with. Maybe I'll put up that picture that I doodled on that coaster.
You absolutely should. I think one of the things that we haven't sort of checked on yet is one of the major things that aids my procrastination, which is self-doubt or imposter syndrome. Like, here's the thing, like, I think that like I'm really good at drawing some things, but I'm not really good at drawing everything. And it pigeonholes me. And I self-doubt because I go, I don't know where to start with this drawing. Whereas like music, I feel a little more confident, a little more flexible. But with drawing, which I love to do, and making art, I sit down and I'm like, draw a guy. And then I'm like, well, you're bad at feet. So just draw his upper half.
I always thought the secret to drawing well is to find that razor's edge between what you can draw and what you can't draw, and to sort of ride that little wave there, and to find something that makes it look like you can't draw it, but you're kind of either you're not drawing it, like the Liefeld technique, where you just don't. If you can't draw feet, you just don't draw them. You put a cactus down there,
right?
Or a cloud of smoke or something.
You block them.
Yeah,
that's all the debris everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a matter of sort of it's sleight of hand, and if you can't draw hands, then you put the hands somewhere else. You know, there's this book I read as a kid called The Man in the Ceiling, which was by James Thurber, and he was also a cartoonist, did a bunch of New Yorker cartoons and stuff like that. But the whole thing is I remember just a whole thing about how the main character is this young kid who's trying to be a comics artist, and he can't draw hands. And there's like a page in that book that's just all of the hands he's trying to draw, and they either look like bunches of bananas, or they look like a bunch of croissants or something. But it's funny because that's sort of like, that was kind of like Thurber's art style. Because everything was just sort of like, it looked goofy. Like you know, you look at like some of my favorite artists are like Shel Silverstein, William Steig. Like they're these very sketchy, like Quentin Blake did all the Roald Dahl illustrations. Yeah. They all look like children's drawings, kind of, you know, and clearly I've kind of taken some of that with me. And it's funny because I'll still get that thing where like, what can't I draw? And if I draw something and it looks like I'm like trying too hard, it frustrates me because I'm like, I should have drawn that worse. I should have drawn it like I don't give a shit. It's almost like comedy. If you're trying too hard, it comes across as like cringy and like desperate. And there's like a visual artistic version of that where like you just if you're like kind of too tightened up, and I think that so much of like figure drawing or that like the sketchy studio approach where your art is worthless. Learn how to get rid of it. Learn how to throw it away. That's why you draw it with fucking burnt sticks on shitty newsprint. And like I think there's something like valuable in there where it's the second that you're like,
that's why I always feel like in art school, and art school was, and we've talked about this before, but like if you've ever been to like a legit art school, like they do this shit where they start you off with like 30-second sketches, and then 1 minute, and then 5 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and then an hour, and then like the afternoon is basically like 1 3-hour like detailed thing. And I always felt like I got worse and worse and worse throughout the day. And that wasn't just degradation of my own skill. It was because like my style lends itself better to something kind of quick and characteristic rather than something that was like detailed and heavy, because to abstract something
it gets too precious.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas with music, I feel like I have the opposite approach of that, where it's like the longer I spend like finessing something, like the songs I make for Weird Heat come off as like quick and effortless, but they take me a long fucking time. And I'm proud of them, but it's the kind of thing where like I overthink them. But I also, and this is a really good trick, tell myself at the end of some sessions where I'm like, I'm head down on this thing for 4 hours, I just go ship it and just close it and end it. And ending music sucks. Ending drawings is just, you just stop drawing it. And then sometimes people go like, you didn't shade that enough. But ending music, like, that's why so many people ended music in fucking fade outs for 30 years. Because they don't know what else to do. And I've never done that. I don't even know how to do that, honestly. So
dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, so I put like a sound effect or like, you know, a couple of notes or like one cool long note or build up to something and then stop. But the more I spend time with music, the more I'm happy with it. Whereas drawing, the more I spend time with it, the less I love it. And so I have to train myself to be quick there and be thorough elsewhere. And so it's applying different creative skill sets to different parts of my creativity instead of taking a blanket approach to all of them.
Yeah, I think there's also like a budgeting of time where if you have this sort of like, if you throw this sort of weight of creative energy at a project and you get it to a point where it's almost done, but you're not loving it anymore, it gets to the point where like it's almost like high stakes gambling, where you're like, oh, I've already sunk this much time into this, I should probably stick with it, but like I think at the same time I don't want to fuck it up. Like I don't want
Right.
to wreck it. Like I have this painting I started of a raccoon digging through a pile of trash, and I think it's really good. I really like it, but I look at it and I'm like, this isn't finished. This isn't where I want it to be. But I also don't want to add anything else because if I do, I'll fuck it up. So it exists in this sort of suspended animation of like it's not a sketch, but it's not a finished piece.
Right.
And the only thing stopping it from being a finished piece is me saying that. Like that's easy enough to just go in and be like, I have decided this is done. The end.
Well, I'll put it this way. The people keep asking me for my new album, even though I put out like 25 songs this year. They want an album, and I don't blame them because my last one, was an album. The number one thing holding back my album right now is that I don't know what to do for the album cover. And I've gone through 60 different ideas and sketches, and I've reached out to a bunch of different artists, and some have gotten back to me and some haven't. And
I started, but
yeah, I mean, it's just
then
happens.
I got shin splints.
Yeah, you got writer's block.
Then we started a fucking podcast together.
Exactly, it happens, and that's a weird thing to be like. This medium is held back by this medium, and they all have to channel through your brain. And I thought my last album was like, I'm really proud of it, and the album cover is really strong and iconic, and Panda Musk did it. And for this time, I was like, I'm going to give him some breathing space. I'll reach out to somebody else, or I'll do it myself. And I'm stuck creatively because it's like putting a fucking tattoo on my body, and I don't know how to do that because I don't have any, and you have tons of them.
Actually, that's a really funny thing. I was supposed to go get a tattoo tomorrow. I was feeling shitty yesterday, so I canceled. They emailed me. They're like, "What about the 15th?" And I was like, "Sweet, I gotta postpone. I got my tattoo postponed. I have no idea what I'm getting a tattoo of.
Oh, really? You just
No, I was like working on shit. I got this guy. This is like the last thing I drew that I really love. This thing on my arm, which
if you're listening, it's a devil throwing up.
It's like it's a devil wearing sunglasses and he's vomiting and he has horns and he has a little like a speech bubble with a heart on it. But I got that because my wife has that on her leg. And a friend of ours got it on her arm, and the reason we all have it is because as a groomsman gift before my wedding, I got that fucking laser engraved on all the flasks, which then everyone drank out of, and then a bunch of people were like, actually no, my stepsister got temporary tattoos made of that image because I was like, here's an image that I drew on a napkin. I thought it was kind of cool, maybe for a flask, and then gradually it spun out of control, and now it's engraved in people's ink in their skin, so. I need something of that magnitude to go next to it, but
so that's a weird thing, right? Because it's like in this year of you having self-described writer's block, or drawing creator's block, you did this thing that now appears on multiple human beings' bodies forever, and so like I think that's what kind of fucks you up too, and that's part of the self-doubt umbrella is that you go, okay, well, like the last time I really sat down to make a drawing, it became flasks. Temporary tattoos, real tattoos, probably fucking T-shirts, all this other shit. And
I should put it on a shirt, but I ran it by my wife, and she was like, I don't know, I think it should be special. And I'm like, you fucker, it could be such a good T-shirt.
It could be a good T-shirt. But so like how do you follow that up, right? Like do you just draw in a sketchbook and then it doesn't become anything but a sketch? Or like you put it on the internet and people like it?
I like all my stupid ass tattoos, and almost all of them we use the term did my homework on the bus. Those were all... Like one of my first stupid tattoos, I drew it while I was waiting to get the tattoo done.
Oh, really?
Like I walked in there and I was like, you got any time? He's like, yeah, I'll be free in like half an hour. And I was like, you got any colored pencils? And he's like, yeah. And I
didn't know that. That's awesome.
So I don't know. I just I doodled a bunch of stuff on the spot and was like, yeah, it fits my whole approach to making other stuff.
Well, I think like ultimately for creative types, I don't know if you're always just defined by your output. There's this like really weird metric happening right now, and like we're friends with a bunch of YouTubers. They're in this like this gauntlet constantly where the algorithm punishes them for not putting new things out every single day. Our show would be more successful if we made one every week, flat out. Yep. It isn't. And so we're not. And so
we're kind of trying to shift that way, but
I think that like there's this notion that you have to make something every single day, and we will see people burn out from that. That's already started to happen. But I think that it's just as important to breathe and take a break. And I think that the blank spaces are as valuable as the noise, and the minimalism is as important as the flooded composition, right? Like, and it's hard to find that. It really is, because you say to yourself, like, I haven't done anything in a while. I haven't done this and I haven't done that in a while. And then sometimes you go like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years without painting. I remember my mom always said that, where she was like, as soon as I have some time free from work, I'm going to get back into painting. And then she got laid off in like 2006. And for Christmas, we got her all this art supplies and all these paints and stuff like that. And she just couldn't get back to it because her brain had been conditioned to be creative in different ways. And she didn't really paint again. And there's a bunch of old paintings in my parents' house that like she made before all that, but she never really got back to it. And that was always a fear for me. And then I looked up one day and I'm like, oh, I've gone like 6 years without like drawing anything significantly that I put out. But I want to make a conscious effort to do that, to try more often. But I don't want to make it feel like it's something I have to do all the time, because your creativity, like you've illustrated or not, weird term, described, can be applied to different sections of your life and still work. Like if you're making a thumbnail or you're doing this show, you're not drawing, but you're ticking off some box. If you're painting a model kit, you're not drawing, but you're making something. So I think it's
the lights are on, but nobody's home. I don't know.
Be able to acknowledge those victories and be proud of yourself for doing at least that. I mean, I think even like cooking dinner is creative. It really is, like it can be. And it's also one of those things where if you cook it too long, it's kind of gross sometimes. So don't do that. But yeah, don't beat yourself up too much. Give yourself moments to breathe. Switch up your mediums if you're feeling stagnant or stuck. And ultimately know that it's really there for you. Like creativity is there for you to feel a little bit better about yourself and to hopefully help others see something that isn't this miserable world for 4 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, we started the show to work through creative issues and stuff, and I feel like we're doing that right now in a very kind of earnest and genuine way. But yeah, people find ways to sort of, do that mental bloodletting that needs to happen with whatever it is that's in there, whatever demons you have kicking around that you're like, I need to do something to like, that isn't physical and isn't strictly mental and it isn't, perfunctory. So like, you find that other place to put things. I don't know. But yeah, we do have, here's the part where we segue. We do have some of the things I've drawn up on t-shirts. Brian drew some of them too. If you head to weirdheat.com, we have shirts and mugs and tote bags. And that's all there. You can go check that out. Maybe I'll start actually putting new fucking cocktail napkin drawings up on some shirts. Maybe when I figure out what my next tattoo is, I'll throw that on a shirt. Who knows?
And if you're one of the things we didn't really mention is that inspiration can come from anywhere. And so if you have an idea for something you'd like to see us draw, let us know. If you are an artist and you are short on ideas, show us your art, and we'll throw you an idea of what you should draw. We'll give each other assignments. We'll try that. Maybe that'll stir our fucked up brains for a minute. In the meantime, I think you should draw the art for this episode.
God damn it. You fucker.
Well, I don't know. What is creative block or writer's block or artist block?
I'm just going to draw a Lego.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
The creative block Lego.
How about a pencil stabbing a Lego?
There's just blood coming out. But
sure.
It's like cool blood.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, and if you want to find us on Twitter, we're out there. I'm Max Scoville. He's Agent Bizzle. There is a Weird Heat Patreon, which is how we keep the show alive, because clearly I'm not really on top of the whole fucking t-shirt game. Sorry, John. That's patreon.com/weirdheat. Subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, leave a review, whatever the fuck it is you're consuming this on. Dear God, micromanaging a million different social media feeds is also a clerical pain in the ass. But if you want to head to our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/group/weirdheat, there are a bunch of wonderful people who are in there kind of talking to each other and interacting, and it's really, really cool. I hop in there and see people making cool stuff, and if you want to share your creations with the world and get feedback, you can do that. Everyone seems very, very nice and vulnerable in there, so if you're a bully, don't go in there.
Yeah.
It's full of real toughies.
You will be nice to death.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's this show. Hopefully we think of some better ideas for next episode, but until then, thank you for listening, and we love you.